Okay, one, two, three. Welcome, Dr. Stephen Hobbs here, and sharing a time interview here with Chris Thomson. This is number 2 of 5 of the Wealthers series. And remember, Wealthers are people that I believe have great ideas and suggestions that are going to move your business and life forward. And I want to unpack their ideas and get them to share them with you. And this again is the second of 5. And it's linked to the topic of inner cosmos. But today's session is really about the knowable universe. And I'm going to have Chris unpack a couple of terms here because I think we need to get a little grounding, Chris, so that people understand where we're going with this topic today. So I'm just going to ask you, what does knowing and know mean so that people can just get that foundation piece with you?
Well, we began discussing this last time. For me, there's 3 kinds of knowing, basically 3 kinds, okay? The most common kind is indirect. And then there are 2 other kinds, both of which are direct. But I'll talk first about indirect, because that basically is what human knowledge is. It's indirect. When I say indirect, I mean that someone else has done the knowing for us. They've got there before us. The example I gave yesterday was Mount Everest. I'm a climber. I love mountains. I knew about Mount Everest in 1953 when it was first climbed. But I've never been. So I've never physically been there, okay? So I don't know it firsthand. So my knowing relies on other people's knowing. Therefore, my knowing is indirect, okay? And I think you'll agree that that applies to a lot of human knowledge. You know Einstein's famous equation, E = mc². Not because you got there first, but because he got there first. And you know it through him. So you know it indirectly through him. And virtually any branch of knowledge you can name is indirect knowledge. And there's one big important thing that you have to say about indirect knowledge, and that is trust.
Yes.
That we trust other people's knowing. Okay? So I trust that other people have been to Everest and seen it. I trust what they say about it. I trust what they say about its height, for example. And that applies to every other bit of knowledge that I trust. So most human knowledge is indirect, and I don't think people realize that. It's obvious when you think about it, but it isn't the kind of thing we normally think about. I am more interested in the other 2 kinds of knowing, which are direct, okay? I haven't got names for them, but the first kind is what we do every day through our 5 senses. We see, we hear, we touch, we smell, we feel. We do it all the time, every day. And thus we know the world around us through our senses. That's direct knowing for us, for most people. And that's normal experience. So I use the word normal to mean common.
Okay.
And then there's the less common kind of knowing. There are many words for it. Perhaps the most usual word is intuition. And a nice, neat definition of that is knowing without knowing how we know. We just know. And if we tried to unpack it and understand how we know, we couldn't do it. There's no scientific way of analyzing that. Somehow we just know. You walk into a room, for example, full of strange people, and you immediately spot someone on the far side of the room, and you kind of connect instantly with that person. You don't know why. You don't know why you're doing it, but you know you're doing it, okay? So that's another kind of direct knowing. So when I say knowing, I mean one of these three things.
Okay. So it's, in a sense, this direct knowing is like your lived experience. You're experiencing it through your senses and the intuition. And if not, the other kind of knowing is you've read about it, you've heard about it, you've talked about it, kind of idea. And knowing where that is coming from, knowing where it's coming from, and this trust factor is really important to this storyline of knowing that you're talking about at this point in time. Would that be a fair summary?
Sure, and as you say, the trust factor is really important. We talked yesterday about the science story, okay? And I'm not against science. I think science has produced many wonderful things and will carry on doing so. But there's a deep sense in which I don't trust the science story. Why? Because somehow inside me, it doesn't make sense. Somehow inside me, it doesn't ring true. You know, if you ask me to justify that, I find it difficult to bring all the evidence out. All I can say is I just know absolutely inside me that the science story tells us half the truth. It gives us a very accurate half the picture, okay? There's nothing wrong with that half of the picture. The problem is that science and scientists believe they're getting the whole picture, when in fact they're not. So that's where my trust breaks down, and that's where my direct knowing comes into play.
Okay, so that's a good connection. So again, encourage people to listen to 1 of 5 video just to catch up with what Chris is sharing here. There was a question that I sort of framed up. I'm going to see if it makes sense here. Is how is knowing possible in the first place? Does that ring?
It's a very good question.
Okay, all right.
It's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. I'm not sure how often that question is asked. It's a wonderful question. And for me, the answer is that knowing is possible only because things are knowable. Just to try and unpack that. So, I mean, science exists only because the universe is knowable. Only because there are things that we can know about it. If there weren't things we could know about it, then science clearly couldn't exist. I mean, science is about knowing, and science is a body of knowledge, okay? And when you think about it, you know, it's the more you think about it, the more you realize that there's a lot that is knowable. And we can be sure of that because human knowledge is now vast.
So in this,
yeah, on you go, sorry.
So in a sense then, knowledge is increasing. It's not decreasing. It's going to keep increasing. Is that what you're sharing?
Well, let's do it this way. It's been increasing all my life. And it's been increasing all throughout human history. So human knowledge has grown and grown and grown. If you doubt that, just go on the internet for 10 minutes.
Yes.
And you realize how much knowledge there is. I forget the actual statistic. There's one of these impressive statistics which says that human knowledge is growing, doubling every year. So it's doubling every year. It's difficult to imagine that, okay? But it's like imagining a huge library. So when I was young, say in the 50s or 60s, it was said that all human knowledge could be contained in the Library of Congress in Washington, okay? Which is one building. It's a big building. And even if you imagine that some of that knowledge is on microfiche and not in book form, It's still quite a lot of knowledge. Now that's not possible. That's no longer possible. It's no longer possible to house all human knowledge in one place. It's why we have the cloud. And I suspect that as time goes by, probably quite soon, in fact, most human knowledge won't be in libraries. It won't be in one place. It won't be in conventional form. It'll be on the cloud.
So that goes back to, like, the title of this one is the Inner Cosmos, the knowable universe, just to remind everyone. So there's this inner knowing, but there's that outer knowing that you're sharing and that we're tapping into, so that we have this knowable universe that we can then ourselves interact with and let it interact with us. So that's great, because I think it's a good point to make. I always remember, and I jokingly said at one point in time, I'm going to create the Library of Alexandria again. And I attempted to, where can I find it? How can I bring that in? How can I synthesize it? How can I summarize it? And it was always, oh, hang on, I just learned something. Oh, just learned something. Oh, I now know this. And so I appreciate now with the internet, I can go get a lot of what it is that I need, and I don't need to store it because it's already stored somewhere. I just need to know how to access it now. And I think there's an element of truth there about how to access this knowledge that's available. Any thoughts around that?
Sure. I mean, going back to my childhood, my education, it was a good education, but it was conventional in the sense that in those days, you were given knowledge. So a lot of the educational process then was about giving children knowledge, okay? I imagine that good education these days is more about how to find knowledge, how to find out about things, as well as about how to think well and think critically, okay? So, but just to go back to something you said, because we've slipped slightly sideways from that. You used a phrase, the knowable universe. And I said, yeah. And, because it's knowable, science exists. Because it's knowable, human knowledge exists. And here's the thing. So our knowledge has been growing and growing and growing and growing and keeps growing. And my sense, Steve, is that this won't stop. There's no particular reason to imagine why it should stop. Why should human knowledge suddenly stop at some date in the future? You can't imagine that, okay? So it looks like human knowledge will keep increasing. Forever, you might say, forever, okay? And that raises a very interesting thought. Because if that's true, it means the universe and everything in it, including this planet and everything on it, is knowable. If our knowledge is going to keep increasing forever, then the obverse of that coin, so to speak, is that everything is ultimately knowable. Because if it wasn't knowable, everything, then at some point our knowledge would stop. But because there's no reason for it to stop, that means the entire universe is knowable. And I think that is a very significant fact, if it's true. The fact that the entire universe is knowable. I think that has great significance.
Well, you hinted at that a little bit yesterday, because when you shared, there's about the being and then being with others, being human with others, and this notion of being with nature and then being with Gaia, the world, and then you hinted at being with the sun and the galaxy, and then the galaxy of galaxies. There's got to be the universe has to be wholly knowable, right? It's your point. Because at this point in time, I appreciate that, but what's that about? Oh, I'm looking forward to knowing that. Getting out there and exploring all of that.
I mean, this topic and that possibility of the universe being entirely knowable raises so many different avenues. Okay, and we could spend a year and a day on these avenues. But let's just explore one if you'd like. Another way of saying that the universe is entirely knowable, another way of saying that is that the universe is made of knowability. Okay, what's the universe made of? It's made of knowability. That's just another way of expressing what we said earlier. And that is really intriguing for me, because I've often been told that the universe is made entirely of energy. That everything in existence, including us, the jacket you're wearing, the things behind you, the bodies we have, everything around us, the air, everything you can think of, is a form of energy. So matter is a form of energy, light is a form of energy, heat is a form of energy. Everything you could imagine, atoms, particles, the lot, okay? There's nothing that you could imagine that is not a form of energy. So it's generally accepted by scientists and by others too, by mystics, for example, that the universe consists entirely of energy. Fair enough, fair enough. But we've just said something else, have we not? That the universe consists entirely of knowability. And that's kind of really intriguing. Does that mean that somehow energy, this physical concept, the things that physicists talk about, for example, the energy is somehow knowability? No, I think it is, okay? I think it is. But it would take some time to unpack that, okay? And you might want to find a way into that so that people can follow us.
Well, let's take the word knowability, ability to know. Fair?
Yeah, sure.
It's sort of like accountability, ability to account for, responsibility, ability to respond to. So knowability is the ability to know. So there is the practicality of our ability to know in our current being and being human, as there is about this ability to know about that which is cosmological, metaphysical, whatever words that ring for you. Just like there's that quantum physics going down, down, down in a sense, right? And up, up and up and out, out and out. So when we talk about the practicality of the ability to know, the knowability, and if the universe is filled with knowability, what would be some suggestions that you would make about me or the persons who's listening, the people who are listening to this, their ability to know? How can they improve upon that or focus that or strengthen that? Maybe that's a way into taking a look at this knowability, the knowable universe.
I suppose the first word that comes to mind is unlearning.
Yeah, true.
I mean, the opposite of what we traditionally think of as learning, okay?
Yeah.
So in a way, learning not how to do something. I'll give an example. I'm a climber, I'm a walker. I love walking in the mountains here locally in the Pyrenees, where I live. And occasionally I walk with other people. And a few years ago, I walked with a botanist in the mountains. He specialized in local plants, okay? Especially mushrooms. There's a kind of obsession for picking mushrooms in this area. People go mad and pick them and cook them. Anyway, I walked with this guy, and I realized after a while that it was like walking with a Japanese camera beside me. Let me try and explain. So I was just enjoying where we were, just soaking it up. There was almost too much to soak up, if you know what I mean. It was so pleasant. Whereas he was, as if he was a camera, taking pics of, with his mind's eye, of the plants that he was seeing and giving them names. And this went on and on and on. And I said nothing because I knew how different he and I were. It would have been difficult to engage in a conversation about that. But what I felt he was doing was blocking out the experience by giving names to things. Oh, that's a Fluorex, blah, 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 okay? And having pronounced the name, he would then turn away from it and walk on until he found the next thing to name. And I felt he had no connection with the plant. Is this making sense at all?
Well, it's naming what you know, but it doesn't mean you're taking in all of the knowability that's around you.
You're taking in almost nothing. I remember there was a book written some years ago, probably at least 50 years ago, by a guy, an American called Arthur Young. Arthur Young. You might know the name. He invented the helicopter. Okay? Arthur Young. He and Sikorsky. But Arthur Young was the American end of that. And wrote this wonderful book called The Reflexive Universe. The Reflexive Universe. Quite detailed, full of interesting stuff and facts. But the basic idea was the universe is a mirror. And the universe will give you back what you put into it. So the more you put of yourself into, shall we say, observing and being with the universe, okay? The more the universe or nature or the forest will give back to you. It's a very symbiotic, it's a very reciprocal process. If you're simply giving names to plants you see, nothing will happen. The universe won't interact with you because it can't. The universe would like to interact with you, it would love to, but you're blocking out, your mind is blocking out any possibility of interaction.
Well, I'll use another example in the business world, because this Welter series is about, business and life. What I'm hearing you say is similar to when you look at an organizational chart, most people will follow the lines in the boxes and they'll operate. But there's this amazing world that exists in the white space of that organizational chart. And nature is there are things that are there in front of you, and then that botanist who was walking along is, I'm naming this, that's sort of what's in the foreground in a sense, and there's a but there. What's in the background there as well? What is it that you can know that's even more, there's aesthetics there, there is horizontal, vertical, there is lots of other ideas that can come to mind. So if I use that organizational chart and the white space and lines and talking about your person that you were walking with and naming it, am I making a connection here that's similar, or like a metaphoric connection?
Absolutely, absolutely. Here's an idea, okay? And I hope this connects with what you just said. A very good exercise, which I've tried myself and I've tried with others, is just to go out into the country or even just out into the street, depending on where you happen to be. Just go out. It might be a field, it might be a mountain scene, but it'll be some kind of scene in front of you. And then you ask the other person a very simple question. Really simple question. And the answer will tell you a lot about that person.
Yeah.
And the question is, what do you see? And my experience of doing that with people is that about 50% of them are trying to please you. They're trying to second guess you. They're trying to guess what the question means. Okay? So he must mean something specific. What's he trying to get me to look at? That kind of thing, okay? If you are a mystic or a Zen master or a Taoist, you would probably say, you know, I see everything. I see too much. There's too much to see. You couldn't possibly answer the question because there's literally too much. I'm trying to relate to that white space you just mentioned, okay?
Yes.
Because that white space represents the too much.
Yes.
You know, most of us focus on the one thing or the few things, okay? Because that's, I guess, the mentality of our time.
Yeah.
You know, to focus on something specific. Yeah, it's understandable that people do that. And yet, as you point out, it's the empty space. That's in terms of vision, it's the empty space. In terms of sound, it's the pause. I mean, I told you once before that if you want to hold someone's attention when giving a talk, just stop. They may have been sleeping or dozing off, but when you stop, it's amazing. People just wake up and pay attention, and they pay attention to this very creative empty space. That's what they're paying attention to.
Yeah. It's interesting. I call that the credibility pause. Right? Because all of a sudden there's a credibility factor. Hang on a minute, what's going on here? And off you go from that perspective. I hear what you're sharing about the storyline here, because I've created what I call the Saturday suggestions. And each Saturday I put something out that's it's an image with a phrase about looking at what's going on, seeing what's going on, smelling, tasting, this kind of idea. And one of the last ones I put up is when you're walking among the trees, and if it can be more like a grove or forest, look beyond the vertical, and what do you see as the horizontal? Just as one example, that's one of the things that I did. So, but I'd like to connect something that you mentioned in number one interview, so the 1 of 5, and you used the word resonance. Can you connect? So that we start to connect like a thread. There's resonance and knowability. Can you make a connection with those two terms right now?
Sure. Let's go back to the most direct form of knowing, which is intuition. You just know. And you can't rationalize it or explain it. And any attempt to rationalize it or explain it will fail. You simply know. And it's not only that you know, Steve, you really do know, you're absolutely sure. There's no doubt about it, okay? And I suspect, well, more than suspect, I think I know that the reason for that, or the main reason for that, is that we resonate with something. Resonance is when, in science, is when two things are on the same wavelength. They resonate, okay? If you use that analogy of being on the same wavelength, imagine two people being on the same wavelength. Imagine a couple who've lived together for quite a long time, okay? And because they've lived together, they've kind of, shall we say, equilibrated. In a way, come together esoterically, etherically, energetically, okay? And that means that they can communicate without talking because they're on the same wavelength. by the same token, I think much of our knowing is resonance.
Yeah.
It's because there's something inside us, already inside us, which is similar in some way to the thing we're observing out there, okay? It's as if there's an inner cosmos inside us, which is similar somehow to this big outer cosmos, including other people, including forests, including nature, okay? Not to mention planets and stars. It's because there's an inner cosmos inside us that we're able to resonate with its outer equivalent. And that resonance we feel as knowing.
So again, that resonance on a being point of view is I resonate with my own ideas and thoughts, right? And the thoughts are sort of inside, ideas I'm sharing outside. And then there's that resonance with the different aspects as we move out. So this idea that you're suggesting is to be open through this direct knowing of the senses and intuition of this knowable universe, knowing yourself, but also knowing the universe and bringing that all in. That's part of the story of the inner cosmos.
Yeah, most people listening to this will have heard of Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Jung. And he was very interested in this kind of thing. In particular, he was interested in so-called coincidence, the idea of coincidence. And he didn't think that coincidences were just coincidence, if you know what I mean. They were more than coincidence. He wrote a book about it, a very short book called A Causal Synchronicity, a connecting principle. This is what I think. I think coincidences are happening all the time, 24 hours a day. And they're happening because that's the way the universe is constructed. It is constructed to connect. And it is constructed to be knowable, to let us know it, okay? The botanist I mentioned wasn't able because his mind blocked out much of the possibility, okay? But I do believe the universe is constructed in that way. And that what we think of as coincidence, in other words, unusual, abnormal, inexplicable, in fact is very common. So common that it's normal. The problem is, as you can imagine, is that for many people, maybe most people, they are not aware of this happening all the time. But because their minds are otherwise occupied.
Okay. So really that's getting to a point where we could say, all right, we could close off today and say, wonderful, we've got some sense of this knowability and how it might be able to play itself out into the world. And understanding this inner cosmos kind of storyline that we've been going after, and resonance and coincidences. These are the kind of pieces. I know that I'm going to be open for comments, and if people have questions and that. So maybe the next time we meet, let's call it tomorrow, right? When next time we meet, there might be some questions. So I would encourage people, if you have questions that Chris, you'd have Chris sort of tackle and see where we go with it. We'd certainly open you up to that. But if we didn't have questions coming in from people, what would be one thing we would want to unpack tomorrow when we meet? What would be one key concept that you want to link to what we're talking about today, Chris, and then we'll use that as a close down of today.
Okay, let me think for a second or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, here goes. So nature, or if you prefer, the cosmos, okay, always answers our questions. I'll repeat that. Nature, or the cosmos, always answers our questions. But, and here's the but, will do so only in the exact terms of the question.
Okay, so then the quality of the question is
determines the quality of the answer.
Quality of the answer. So that's a great segue into please ask their questions. And we're not saying, oh, I better figure out if this is a quality question. Just ask your questions and we'll unpack them. We'll look at them and see where we're going with this and take a look at this connection that Chris has just shared with us. So with that, Chris, thanks very much for today. Look forward to getting together with you tomorrow, whatever tomorrow is going to be. We'll get together and we'll continue with this Wealther series with people that I believe have ideas and suggestions that are ways to guide you forward in being for the world, being for your business, being for your life. And so with that, Chris, take care, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks again, Steve. Thank you.